Hello, everybody. My name is Molly Moss. I'm the Assistant Director here at Forbes Library, and I have the privilege of introducing the program tonight. We are live streaming tonight's program via our YouTube channel. If you are seated in the front row, like myself, you might appear on camera, like the back of your head. Also, we will have time at the end of tonight's program to take a few questions. Forbes Library is so excited to welcome Andrew Leland, writer, audio producer, editor, teacher, podcaster, and Northampton resident, for a discussion of his book, The Country of the Blind, a memoir at the end of sight. Country of the Blind was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize and named one of the best books of the year by The New Yorker, The Washington Post, The Atlantic, NPR, Publishers Weekly, and LitHub, except I think we probably left out a few. This event celebrates the release of the new paperback edition, which will be available for purchase after the talk, thanks to our friends from Broadside Books. Andrew will be joined in conversation by Pagan Kennedy, award-winning author of 11 books, New York Times columnist, teacher, zine pioneer, podcaster, and journalist. Kennedy was a Knight Science Journalism Fellow at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and had a Smithsonian Fellowship for Science Writing. She was a recipient of an National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship in Fiction, a Sonora Review Fiction Prize, and was shortlisted for the Orange Prize for Fiction, Britain's most prestigious literary award. Her upcoming book, The Secret History of the Rape Kit, a true crime story, will be released in January 2025 by Penguin Random House. Please join me in welcoming them.
Hi, everybody.
Hi. Yeah. Thanks for coming.
Hi, Pagan.
So I'm going to start my interviewing process, our conversation. I guess it's not fully an interview, but
Yeah, it's a casual chat.
Casual chat. So just first I wanted to say I'm really glad you were... Me? I just want to say how glad I am that you were able to come tonight, and because I know you had a pretty bad bout of COVID in the beginning of the summer, and it's been pretty rough. And so maybe I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that and what your summer's been like.
I don't know. It's not. I was trying to think of if it's relevant at all in light of talking about this book, and it kind of is just in a few ways actually. Like a month ago. My wife Lily and I got COVID, and then it's just like I'm still a month later not totally over it. And the first thought that I had about it is just like how solipsistic illness makes me, where like 100% of my emails now begin like, I have been recovering from COVID for 3.2 weeks, and like, what is it about me or illness that makes me feel like I need to disclose that? And like in our house, I feel like we're constantly talking about like, oh, I only got 6.8 hours of sleep last night. So, and I think, with a degenerative retinal disease, one of the things that made me want to write this book was, particularly before I started using a white cane, was this feeling that like I wished I could have a t-shirt that was like, I clearly have a lot of vision, but also don't cross in front of me because I might trip over you, but I'm still going to be able to look at my phone, so don't be confused. And then it turned out that like a cane was that message largely, although it still didn't totally solve the ambiguity. But now I find myself wanting a t-shirt that says like, I've had COVID for 1 month and 3 days, or I've been recovering from it rather. And so that's one piece of it. And then it kind of opens up to a whole other constellation of thoughts around disability solidarity, which is another thing that I started to think about in the book, and thinking about chronic illness in particular, which is something that's always kind of felt uncomfortably at the periphery of my thinking about disability. And this experience has nudged it, I think, closer to the center. But yeah, I'll leave it there unless you want to, in our friendly chat, press on further.
Well, this was because of what you've just been through. I was thinking about, I kind of suddenly realized, oh, you started writing this book, because I remember you started before the pandemic, because I remember sitting like in a living room talking, indoors, talking to you about this book that you were pitching, and we had a lot of conversations about it, and so you started it pre-pandemic, and then you were writing it during the pandemic, and you were really writing about the politics and culture of disability, among other things. And I feel like those pandemic years have really shifted the way that we all think about disability and about our bodies, and about loss, which is something you also wrote about. So I wondered if you could speak to that, about sort of now that we kind of can look back at those crazy years, how do you think what we were all going through kind of affected how the book, was there like a shift in your thinking as COVID, during the darkest year of it? Or
Yeah, it's interesting because I remember the first draft of the book had like 600% more COVID in it than what ended up happening, and part of what the conversation with my editor ended up being was just about, with a book, unlike say a magazine story, you want it to last, right? And you don't want to have, even though it can clearly be a moment in time, there are like, not all moments in time are created equal. I don't know, you can get into the weeds with this argument. I feel like I enjoyed reading fiction writers argue about this, like fiction should be timeless, but also like you're allowed to say she picked up her iPhone 5G and opened the Instagram app, and like timeless fiction can do that too. And there's similar stuff happening in nonfiction. But in terms of COVID in the book, like a lot of the specifics of the like lockdown experience, I think my editor rightly pointed out that was going to feel a little dated, just in terms of like what is that? I think the biggest point was like, what does that experience have to do with the main subject that I'm writing about, which is my experience of gradual vision loss, not lockdown. And I think like even just in the last couple months, thinking about like chronic illness and in talking about the pandemic in the past tense even feels troubling, right? Like it is still ongoing, and there are people still being infected, and immunocompromised people been like living sort of in house arrest essentially for 4 years, and all of that is very much a part of disability justice, or thinking about like what disabled rights entail. And in terms of like the shifting sands of the writing process, like I came to the book with basically from zero, like just like super entitled, non-disabled dude, arguably, right? Like my vision changed a bit, but it was more about a mental attitude. Like I did not consider myself a part of a disabled community or a disabled identity, and like part of the writing the book was like figuring out that I could think of myself in that way. But I was new to 100% of it. And so it was hard to both track my own transition and then also this larger cultural conversation that you're talking about. And I did my best to, but I guess like to try to land this plane. I think that the biggest kind of fissure that illuminated that transition that you're talking about, that sort of changed the way people thought about disability during 2020 lockdown and afterwards, that I saw represented in the blindness world that I was sort of immersing myself in, was sort of a political one about like the distinction between the kind of civil rights model of disability activism, where it's like the blind first, sort of like we are the National Federation of the Blind and we're bound together to fight for the rights of blind people, very much modeled on and sort of historically interwoven with other civil rights struggles, namely the Black civil rights movement, and then this newer, younger disability justice movement that is sort of rigorously intersectional and very much not about a single disability, but much more about decentering white cis men from the conversation, which has been absolutely central in a lot of disability discourse, and sort of seeing the sparks that were flying a bit and continue to fly a bit. I think even like, we can talk about this, but this kind of interesting thing that I observed at the Disabled Voters for Harris Zoom that I lurked on last week, where I feel like that was like completely on display. So there's like, I think a big part of that conversation is like, there's like a Disability 101 thing that's like ongoing, where people are sort of just like coming up to speed with the idea that disability belongs in the kind of like broader DEI, like diversity, equity, and inclusion, like, oh yeah, like that's a thing too. And then there's like, you know, you can go up to the graduate level in terms of like the politics of these different groups and how you approach these questions. Hopefully my sentences are properly punctuated and making sense here, but I urge you to tell me if they're not and help me out.
No,
Okay.
I think the coffee is
working.
kicked in.
All right.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, yeah, I was thinking about how. Sorry, I'm saying this as I'm unlocking my phone, which just locked away the questions from me. You know, I was thinking about this whole issue of that the conversation we were having in 2020 and 2021, and sadly, I feel like are having less now. But the idea of like all of us protecting the people who are the most immunocompromised, and this idea that, and maybe maybe this younger movement that's more intersectional, I think is a piece of that the sort of larger justice around whose bodies are normalized, and and so we really were talking about that a lot for a few years, and it is kind of like we've snapped back.
One thing that's been useful for me to think about in terms of like a conceptual or concept, like a way into that idea is access, which is like such a buzzword in disability, right? Like accessibility is so important, but it's sort of like this endlessly complicated and fascinating and important idea, and sort of the easiest way that I think I understood it, and I think a lot of people come to it, is just like physical disability access. Like this building has a ramp so that wheelchair users can get into the building. But then there's like such a world of access beyond, including that, but that like a lot of people I think fail to recognize, and of course I'm super immersed in like blind accessibility practices, which include like really fascinating stuff like that I write about in the book, like audio description for film, and and there's all kinds of interesting stuff with AI right now, like multimodal AI describing images for blind people. But like access in terms of chronic illness is, I think it's hard to, I think that's like something that does get lost. I'm just sort of echoing what you said, and like what does it mean? So the fact that this event is being live streamed is like a hugely important accommodation, you can call it, or like like gesture of access for people with not just chronic illness but all kinds of disabilities. And I think like one of the things that I've struggled with is like it became very easy for me to feel strident, or at least like passionate about like, it's ridiculous that this disability-oriented Zoom call sent out a PDF that's inaccessible to my screen reader. Like, come on, guys, access. But then I would like then go to a party and not wear a mask, and like not think about it. And like, it's just, there's really no excuse for it other than that, like, okay, I guess like the circle of my compassion or my sense of activism or whatever you want to call it is limited. And in the same way that I also like bought something on Amazon that afternoon, probably, and like, or, there's any number of transgressions that I've made as a bad progressive. And that's one of them. And, I guess the first step would be talking about it, and hopefully it doesn't end there. But yeah, it's an ongoing process, I think. And it's tricky because people are very quick to get really mad, justifiably, but also I've found myself sometimes feeling shut down and like not thinking in a compassionate way about access when I feel like blamed. And then I also do the same thing. So that's the soup that I am sipping in my long COVID bed. It's not long COVID, but yeah.
All right. Well, I hope you're also like watching a lot of the British baking show or whatever.
BoJack Horseman on Netflix.
Yeah, there you go. So this is your final huzzah of your book tour, and I was hoping to shift into kind of the glamorous tales from the road mode. I just was wondering, I don't know, what were the best moments? I want tales of glamour, joy, fabulous encounters.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know, your Taylor Swift.
Taylor Swift picked me up in her helicopter, and we just went on a
But
really
no,
beautiful...
I mean, actually, it's such an amazing thing to be working on a book for years and be alone with this material, and then suddenly it's out in the world. So I'd love to hear more about what that was like.
Yeah, it's been wild. I mean, it's just in digging for glamour, the funniest thing that happened was right after the hardcover came out last summer, my very good friend Jordan arranged like a dinner for me at this restaurant called Superiority Burger in New York City, like a really good vegetarian. I don't know how to describe it. It's a good restaurant, and we had this nice dinner with all these like blind luminaries that I really looked up to, and just like cool and friends, and that was really lovely. And then as we were walking out, like Jordan and I stayed behind to help settle the bill, and then I was kind of following him with my cane out this dark restaurant. I was just sort of like, I think I like saw the back of his head, but was like using good cane technique. And then all of a sudden I heard Jordan go, "Hey, Mark Maron." And Mark Maron is actor, comedian. He's basically like, if you don't know him, he's kind of giving Terry Gross a run for his money with his podcast WTF. And Jordan had like spotted Mark Maron eating alone at the bar, and then just like does not know Mark Maron, and was just like, "Hey, this is Andrew Leland, and like he's got this new book, and you got to get him on the show." And I was just like, "Jordan, what are you doing?" But like, I don't even think Jordan knew this, but like 10 years before that, when I lived in San Francisco and worked for the Believer magazine, I had like, as a tiny young person, was actually quite large, young person, had like moderated a panel that he was on. So then I was just sort of like, "Yeah, I moderated the panel, remember?" And he was like being polite, and he was like, "Sure, yeah, like send the book to my guy or whatever." But then we followed up, and like I was just going to LA anyway to do a book event like 2 days hence. And this story's going on too long. He was like, "Yeah, I'd love to have you on the show, but like you got to be in LA." And I think that was sort of his out. And I was like, "I'm flying there tomorrow." And then amazingly, I was like on the plane. I think I was flying there like maybe in 2 days. Maybe it was the next day. And then like on the plane, I like got the plane Wi-Fi, and the Penguin Press publicist was like, "You're going on Maron." And I was like, "This is crazy." So then I got to go, and the cool thing is he tapes it in his garage, so I got to go to his garage. He gave me one of those liquid death, like, it like looks like a craft beer, but it's just water in a tall boy can. Is that glamour? That's glamour.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
So you were in the green room of his garage with your liquid death.
Yeah.
That is very cool.
It was fun.
Like, it's amazing, because it's like I've seen that garage on his show.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
Obama was there. I think actually it was
Yeah.
a different garage that Obama went to. He had moved.
They saved the special garage for you. Yeah. So this fall you're going to be teaching at Wesleyan, and so I wondered what your writing craft lessons are for us. Like what quick thoughts do you have about, I don't know, how to write well, how to keep us turning the pages, suspense.
Yeah.
Especially in a nonfiction book. And what are you going to be teaching your students?
I mean, one thing that I've noticed that's funny is like I wrote a piece for New York Magazine recently, and that editor used this word, and my friend who reads everything important that I write, he used this word, and I even think my book editor maybe used this word or like a synonym of it, but like dutiful is the word. And it's like, this like stings so bad, but it's so helpful. And I think that's such an important thing to be mindful of in writing, like when something feels dutiful. And it's so hard because like as a writer, you feel like you've got a lot of duties, like you've got to serve your subject, and you've got to like cover the waterfront of this topic and make sure hit these points. And, there's like a lot of jobs you got to do, but it can't feel like you're just like doing the job. Otherwise it just is like a sawdust wooden boring, horrible thing. And so yeah, I guess the question is then like, how do you write something that doesn't feel dutiful while also like, because also like the editor who's telling you it feels dutiful, it's like also telling you to do all these things that then you do, and sometimes they feel dutiful. But the thing that particularly I experienced in writing the book is you sort of have to like trick yourself into being excited and interested about it. I mean, and ideally you have the luxury of just like, I mean, I'm really curious about what your perspective is on this with your many books worth of experience, but like there's a way that you can just sort of, part of it is just follow your curiosity, and like if you're just not interested in the thing, don't write about it. But then there's also like, you sort of do have to write about the thing, but it's sort of like tricking yourself, or not tricking yourself, but like finding a way into it that activates that curiosity. And like, that's such a hard thing, but I think you sort of have to have faith that it's possible. Like, okay, like I can't, like for me, I think a lot of it was, and readers have told me that they were bored by these parts of the book, so like, didn't succeed necessarily with every reader, but I knew my editor was clear, and I knew that I had to like cover the sort of like New Deal era kind of like birth of the Social Security Administration and like social services for blind and disabled people, and like arguments about social workers and the tax code, and like all that stuff is really important disability history that like had direct bearing on stuff that I wanted to write about now. And I just was like, that's not my happy place. And that's probably the most boring part of the book as a result.
I enjoyed that part.
Can I ask you, like, how do you handle that? Is that a problem for you, like the dutiful thing, or is that not even ring true for you?
Well, it's so, as you're, I think with an article in particular, you have so little room, and then you do have to kind of, there is a lot of things you have to check off. And then I'm always, I mean, it's such a weird thing to write now in this age, because you see everybody's responses, not just like on, not just the comments section, but you'll see it on social media or whatever. So you have a sense of like what people that I sort of liked writing in the pre-comments world, where you didn't really know, but it's also great information. But it is funny, like people are mad that you didn't mention X, Y, or Z and think you don't know about it, like, didn't you know about this, and of course you just couldn't fit it in. And there is this, it's like you said, it's hard to kind of satisfy all the things that people expect to see and will feel like you're not, kind of checking that list, but then again, it's like you can't make it a Wikipedia entry, or that's what Wikipedia is for, I guess. But it is tough, and I think the editors that, when you're doing an article, it's more like they do want you to kind of do a lot of splaining. But I don't know. So did you, like, I'm interested in the negotiation you had with your editor around what you guys felt like. You did do a beautiful history of blindness, and the politics around blindness, and I really love that, actually. And but how did you guys decide sort of how much of that to put in? It is a really hard struggle, especially in this sort of, you did this sort of mixed memoir format.
Yeah, that was the thing that took the most work and the most revision. And the book I pitched was both. I was like, it is a memoir of my experience gradually losing vision, but that is going to be a whatever lens or motivation to go on these adventures into blindness world, and explore the history and the contemporary, et cetera. And basically the process was like I knew that the memoir part would sort of be the most immediately available to me as a writer, because it was like downstairs or next to my head. And so I think my first draft was very solid with the memoiristic core. And then my editor's notes on my first draft, where she was kind of like, you promised me like Borges and Milton and Homer, like where is all that? And so then the second draft, I like really laid all that on thick, and that's where the dutiful comment came in, where she was like, "Why are you like dutifully telling me about Homer and Borges and Milton?" And so then it was really in the third draft, and these are like pretty significant rewrites of pretty like huge swaths of the book and reordering and whole chapters off to sea. And but then that third draft was the one where I kind of had that breakthrough about the dutiful thing, and like trying really hard to trick myself into writing about stuff that I maybe wasn't immediately drawn to in a way that felt engaging, and also the other really important piece of that is not just about transitions in like a mechanical way, like how does this flow, but like really like justifications. Like we're only going to care about like Louis Braille's childhood and like the history of raised letter systems for the blind if you care about it, and like how, and then I think there's like the reader is like naturally oriented, or I am anyway, to like care more about the memoir stuff. And it's sort of like immediately more just like Hallmark movie or whatever, like televisual, like, oh, his son gambling through a field. And so like that's an easier motivator, but then how does that give us stakes into the more historical stuff is the challenge. And that was what I worked the most on.
Yeah, it's tough. I always think of sort of trying to use the storyline or the narrative line as like when you hit a suspenseful moment or a bit of a cliffhanger or something, and then you can drop in the information because it's sort of interrupting the story, and hopefully you can only do it for so long, but you're hopefully, almost driving up the suspense a bit because you're like, I'm not going to give you what you want until like 5 pages later, so you're going to have to, but
on TV, that's where they put the ads.
Yeah, exactly.
So you'll like tolerate an ad because you really want to know what's next. I had when I worked at The Believer, one of the editors who I worked under, it's weird to say under, whatever, she was my boss, Heidi Julovitz, who's a really great writer. She used to always talk about like when you give a dog medicine, you like cram it into a little glob of peanut butter, and I always think of it in that way too. Like there's this sort of like necessary but not very palatable thing. You just cram it in a delicious globule of narrative.
Yes, that's a wonderful globule of metaphor. So, and then actually another kind of craft-ish, nerdy, writerly question, but just you've come up with some just barn burner story ideas. I mean, the idea of like riding I don't even know what those planes are.
The Vomit Comet.
The Vomit Comet.
Parabolic aircraft.
Yeah, the parabolic into the zero gravity ride with people who were quadriplegics or, had other disability, and they were sort of auditioning to be astronauts. And, stories like that, I'm just wondering, I'm kind of a story idea nerd, I think. I really am fascinated with how do you come up with the story that's so compelling that you just, as soon as you hear about it, you've got to hear more. It's like the first potato chip. And I think you're very good at finding those. So I was wondering how you do that, how you look for them.
Thanks, Pagan. I don't know. I mean, I've not been writing or produce. That was a story for Radiolab. I haven't been doing that for very long. Like I've really worked as an editor and a producer for most of my career. So you might just be pointing to a couple lucky breaks that I got. But I mean, pretty much every magazine story or like big, like a Radiolab-ish thing that I've done has been just talking to somebody who I am not talking to because I'm trying to get a story out of them, but I'm just like genuinely curious. Like this person is fascinating to me and I want to know more, or just like, yeah, like I would love to, like I did this story for the New Yorker website about deaf-blind communication, like these linguists who are talking about a new, like basically like the world's first linguistically attested fully tactile language. And that just came from, I joined a disability humanities email listserv, and there was this guy who was like, hey, I wrote an essay for Poetry Magazine, and Poetry has all this money, and so if you want a free copy, like give me your address. And I was like, that sounds interesting. And then I saw that he was offering like courses in this thing called Pro Tactile, and I was like, I have no idea what that is, but this guy's essay was awesome, and like maybe I'll just like take his email class. And then I just like got sucked down this rabbit hole of like this deafblind movement, really, and then like the Radiolab thing was similar. Like this blind linguist, Sherry Wells Jensen, was just asking me for writing advice, and she was like, "Hey, I'm doing this thing where we're like all these astronauts," and I was like, "Sherry, would you be down like to do a radio story about that?" Because like, yeah. So that's
you're very good at foraging for these.
I mean, I think it comes down to like the dutiful thing again, like genuine. Like if you're genuinely curious about something, and you have an ambition to like pitch a story at the same time, you can like yoke those two things together effectively.
I really loved, as a kind of connoisseur of story ideas, I really loved the story you did years ago for the, I think it was the New York Times Magazine, where you were talking about your sense of imposter syndrome as becoming a blind person, and then you went and hung out with this woman who was sighted, but playing a blind person on TV, an actress,
Yeah.
and she had to like pretend to be blind.
Yeah.
And so you're kind of learning from her how to be blind, I guess, or how to act blind or something. But I just thought in terms of finding, like maybe that's the peanut butter that you put the pill in or something, but in terms of finding a story idea that has, like, to me, that's a great story idea because it has narrative juice. It's like, well, what's going to happen next?
Yeah.
You want to know, like, well, how this all turns out, and it's just a great story, and it's so quirky, but it's such a great way of talking about something that would be a little bit amorphous otherwise.
Yeah. I mean, that, again, like I was on Facebook and somebody posted, the National Federation of the Blind is like the biggest blindness advocacy organization, and they did a boycott. They organized a boycott of this show called In the Dark on the CW, and it just come out, and they were like, enough is enough, like enough sighted actors playing blind characters. There are plenty of blind actors who could take this role. And then I like watched the trailer for the show, and I was kind of like, this show is kind of funny. Like, I don't know. And it was produced by Michael Showalter, who I idolized when he was in The State on MTV. I was like, there's something kind of interesting about this show. And then I posted a comment, or I shared it, and I think I was like, I don't know. And I didn't put very much thought into it, but I was just like, I'd watch this. And then like some grouchy stranger, as they do on Facebook, was like, way to take a stand, like you're, and kind of like called me out on it. And then it just like, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I was like, is it a problem? What could it be a good show even with that? And then after like enough time elapsed where I couldn't stop thinking about it. I think that's like, you can listen to yourself and be like, it was really just like a biological thing. Like I got to write this story in order to like expunge this obsession.
Yeah, it almost becomes like a dare to yourself. Like, well, what if I did that? And then once you have that thought, it's just sort of impossible not to do it.
Yeah. I feel like it's that, and then I have to like admit to like the theatricality of it being a draw too, because it's like that plus like, and wouldn't it be rad if a magazine would send me to the set, and like, because then I think you have, and I'm like going into like teacher mode, but I feel like that's like a part of it. And the same thing with the Radiolab thing, where it's like, and I'm going to get a seat on that plane, and like there's like a sort of fun adventurousness to magazine journalism that is very appealing.
Yeah. Long may it rest in peace.
Yeah.
It was lovely while it lasted. Sadly, that's all. They're not sending people like us around to do things like that anymore. Very much. Yeah. Anyway, those are my questions, and I wonder if it's time to open things up. I'm sure you all out there have plenty of questions.
Yeah, so if people do have questions, you can raise your hands. And for those of you old enough, I can be Phil Donahue and run around with my microphone.
Thank you, guys. I love the sausage making from both of you. Andrew, I'm just curious whether you got any like really surprising reactions from maybe people in the blind community that showed that they maybe really didn't understand what you were trying to do, or you felt like you missed the the point was missed? I don't know. Were there like, if you were to do this again, were there things that you would be more clear about? Were there surprises, or were you wholeheartedly embraced by people who are blind?
The response from blind people generally has been great, I would say. It's funny, yesterday I was talking to a friend, and he casually was like, and I thought that the review in the Braille Monitor was unfair. And I was like, oh, I didn't see that. So then I looked it up, and I thought it was way more generous than he had made it out to sound. But there was like a moment in it that it's not cool to like quarrel with critics, I don't think necessarily, but like, so there's a part in the book where I am talking about just like the way that I can track vision loss and how kind of ambiguous it is, and like I'm standing at a cutting board and I'll like maybe look up and then look back down, and then I'll like lose the knife that I was just holding that I know is on the cutting board, but it's not there, and I kind of like juice the moment a little bit, and there's like some mock melodrama where I'm like, how blind I've become, like where has the knife gone, and then like I look and there it is. And then in her review, she's like, and this is somebody who's been blind her whole life, is like, just move your hands around the cutting board, dumbass, like what are you doing? And like obviously I could do that, but and the thing that my friend who has also been who's also been blind his whole life, he was like, she missed the point, like it's a journey, like you're going on a journey, like of course you don't know, or that it's not instinctual for you to rub your hands along the cutting board yet. And I really was grateful to him for pointing that out. And so there's a lot of things like that where I have gotten some pushback from blind people, but then like there's like my blind crew who have been very reassuring and being like, you're on a journey, it's okay. So yeah.
Did you, just related, did you feel like there was a hierarchy of like, you're not completely blind, you're on this journey, but you're pretty low in terms of the disability, and then there's people who've been blind their whole lives, and I mean, you must have anticipated some of that, but I'm just curious if that
she went there in that review too, and I think that's the thing that I'm the most sensitive about, because I feel the most sort of ambiguity about it, and like I kind of veer wildly between like completely owning it and like calling myself blind and then being like, I just watched that TV show with that audio description and like I'm totally an imposter. And I mean, the Braille Monitor is an organ of the National Federation of the Blind. It's like their newspaper, and so the NFB's definition of blindness includes me, and I find that really reassuring. And so I was kind of a little bit like, the way I reassured myself reading that snarky piece in her review was like, you're writing this in the NFB, which considers me blind and would have me as a member if I didn't feel like it would compromise my journalistic integrity to join. But their definition is basically like, I don't know it chapter and verse, but it's like, if you use assistive technology, whether it's like a white cane or a magnifier or a screen reader or Braille, to like do the basic tasks. I mean, I was just filling out like an onboarding I-9 form today that basically had the same language, which is about disability more broadly. Like if your daily living is impacted by this in some way, then you're blind. And I use a screen reader all day, every day. I use the white cane wherever I go, and they're not affectations, right? Like I genuinely need them and use them. So like, if the NFB says I'm blind, then I can like own it. And then the other thing I'll add is just like, as a matter of, and I think it's important to say, maybe for people in this room, but especially for shout out to YouTube, is just that like, there's so much denial, or the poet John Lee Clark calls denialism in the world of blindness, and particularly like people who are losing their vision, but I think in general, people are just like kicking the can down the road, like this is not happening, I'm not going to deal with this. And so many people with my particular eye disease have been like, dude, learn the skills now, because you're not going to feel like memorizing screen reader hotkeys when you're like kind of in the thick of the emotional situation of like having dropped down another level. And then there's more to be said there too, because like at what point even is the level, right? Like I'm using them now and they're useful. So like what, but there's so much of that like to quibble about, like, her line was like, someday he'll maybe, maybe, and there's reality to that too. Like, I know people, excuse me, who, are very clear about the reality that like being low vision and having no light perception are like very different ball games in terms of like how you operate in the world. And I'm not at all disputing that, but I do think that it's really important for me to embrace not only the identity, but also like the skills in order to live a good life, basically, at this point.
Next.
Hey, I would love to hear you talk more about embracing the identity, because it was something that you haven't always had, and yeah, just what that experience has been like. And do you find yourself, are there times where you forget and then you're like, oh yeah, that's me, or you would, you're signing yourself up for something that you realize like you have to approach differently now because of this, and just what that's like. I think for yourself, but also for your friends and family, and how you kind of have to hold their hand as you're learning your new identity. They kind of have to learn it too.
Yeah. How am I doing with the embracing of my own identity, both myself and my friends and family? I mean, the first thought that comes to mind is just thinking about that word again, access, and like it's ambiguous for me, and I guess I think I would say that it's one of those things. Like I got to give credit where I read this, but somebody was just talking about, I think it's a common idea, the thing in the airplane where they're like, put your own mask on, and then before you put on the minor next to you. And it's, like you got to help yourself before you can help other people. And I think that's been a thing that's come up for me a lot, where like, and I write about this in the book in terms of my marriage, where I'm sort of like, had this unfair expectation, like Lily should just like look at me and like realize what I need. And it's like, oh, what do you know? Like she doesn't, because I don't even know. And like, so I sort of have to do the work of like, what are my access needs, right? Like what does this mean for me? And then I can express that more effectively to other people. And then that's really just the beginning, because then you encounter the whole wide world of people who are like skeptical of it or forget or whatever. But I think like I'm still sort of the baby steps place of just like, and it's also a little bit of a moving target, because my vision is changing very slowly. And so sometimes in different situations it's different. But I think, just like thinking about access, and maybe I'll leave it there unless anybody wants to poke further at the quivering jelly.
Okay. What has been your favorite and least favorite parts of the book tour or talking about the book?
Favorite? I mean, I had a little bit of this experience working at the Believer magazine of just like meeting subscribers, and feeling like I put my entire life in this magazine, and like you're at this party and that's cool. But like this has been another level of that experience of like readers. It's really amazing to meet people who tell me that they read it and were impacted by it, and that's like, there's like nothing better than that as a writer. And particularly like with a book like this where, like a guy emailed me and was like, I lost my vision, or like 70% of my vision pretty suddenly. And then somebody gave me your book, and like, I read it like when I still needed somebody to hit play on my iPhone for me. And it like really gave me like gas in my tank to like learn the skills and get out there. And now now he's like on a baseball team in Brooklyn, and like maintaining his job as something in finance, and it seems like he's doing good. And it's all credit to me. Just kidding. No, but like, it's like stuff like that is rad. Least favorite. It's kind of like what you were saying about people who are like, why isn't your article the Wikipedia page for the thing? You know, and like there's like, I don't want to call out this person because they live in the Valley. But there was like I did an event last summer. I mean, there was at the Q&A, there was a question that like the person hadn't read the book, or like I felt like they had like skimmed the index of my book and was like, ho, missing this item. And then like their question was like, why isn't that there? And then it was just like, really? Like, you're just here to, you know, it's like the comments section, but live, comments live. And that's, you know, that's annoying, but also like professional liability, and I can't complain too much about it.
So I'm thinking about what you said at the beginning about the relationship between chronic illness and disability, and then sort of, you know, having a lot of your information about COVID or your experience around COVID edited out of the book, and sort of this this thing where, you know, like the feminist insight that I had to love my body really changed when I realized that, and my body's constantly changing, and it's a different body with a chronic illness, for instance. And I've been trying to figure out what the question is about that, and it's something about, and how, like, what's the relationship between the delicious peanut butter and beautiful narrative and the big mess of all that, and especially in the context where, at least I feel, the culture is trying so hard already to forget so many of the insights that, and the pain that we experienced in the height of COVID.
So just to make sure I heard you correctly, I mean, is the question basically how to hold the sort of two opposing ideas of, or what, could you end your question again for me?
I guess it's about, well, let's see. I'm going to change it a little, I guess. Okay. Do you feel like that was a big loss to lose all of those, all the work you did around, the writing you did around COVID, and then and sort of in generally, I guess that's enough, but especially considering your experience that you're having now and the relationship between chronic illness and disability.
Yeah, I don't know if I should feel differently, but I really like feel strongly that I like took my best shot with this book, and I don't have any regrets. And like, I think maybe it was useful to have been around writers for long enough to just know that it's like, and magazines I think are helpful too, where it's like you just have to ship the thing, and like God invented deadlines, and so it's like it's a document of a time, and it's a document of like my thinking at a particular moment in time, and I'm fully happy to, you know, in now or in 5 years think more critically about the lacuna in it. And I think the stuff that got edited, I don't want you to think that it was like, you know, really sharp observations about mutual aid and like care in the time of pandemic. It was really just like bourgeois lockdown freakouts, you know? I mean, probably, I don't know. I don't totally remember, but I would guess it was more the latter. You know, and now, and also, I don't know that like it would have made the book better, or it just would have been different. And so I think, I don't know, as a writer, I'm excited now to be like, what am I going to do now? Okay, now I have an obligation to dig into this stuff. But like that, the book is okay being what it is, and I don't feel like it was irresponsible, you know, because I gestured enough to like disability justice movement, which I feel like it's a little bit of like a placeholder, you know, it's like, and like see also, you know, and you can go down that rabbit hole, or I hope readers will, you know, in the notes, and there's enough of a like flashing sign, like if that's that direction, I'm heading there and you can too. But like the book, you know, I just, like I was saying when we were talking about it during our conversation. It was enough just to get me past the like disability 101 gates into this like arena, and I wasn't yet ready to start fighting those bigger battles, but I have an ambition and an obligation to now.
Do we have another question?
Since you said that you have an ambition and obligation too, I would love to hear a little bit about what this future vision is like for your next, like for where this takes you, kind of.
Yeah.
I would like to hear that from both of you.
Oh, yeah. You want to go first? Okay. I mean, I don't know at all, but and I don't want to overstate the like long COVID anxiety of this month necessarily. That's not like, I don't know, that's a project I'm doing. But in general, I'm excited to broaden the scope of thinking about disability beyond blindness, but also like including blindness. And like the general swing that I've been thinking about is about like epistemology, like ways of knowing, like how we know the world. And there's like, a lot of interesting stuff around perception and blindness that I kind of like get into in various ways in this book. But I think there's more to be said, but then also I'm curious about how that connects to like other disabled ways of knowing, and like what, yeah, I don't have a good pitch for you, but I'm interested in communication and language and knowledge and disability, and like, there's a lot of interesting stuff around like the tactile language stuff, but also, yeah, I guess, and it always comes back to access too. It's like that question of like how you make something accessible. One of the things that I found most exciting about when I first started thinking about disability, and I realized it didn't have to be like what I thought disability was when I was like 11, which is like scary, gross thing that you don't want to think about, but it was actually like an entire like expansive, exciting, beautiful, joyous, challenging field. It was like thinking about those interpretive questions around access and like, what does it mean to make a novel accessible to someone with an intellectual disability, and so on. And so like those are like the starting questions that will ideally lead me somewhere more coherent and interesting. What about you, Pagan?
Well, yeah, I have this book coming out in January that I actually finished a while ago, and then it just actually COVID and all kinds of COVID-related holdups in the publishing industry have made it so it's not coming out until January. But that's maybe a good thing because the election, nobody can think about anything besides the election right now anyway. And it's called The Secret History of the Rape Kit. And this started as a very long piece I did for the New York Times, telling the story of the woman who made the rape kit happen and in the 1970s, and then following up. And then for quite a long time, I could not find her, so it's a lot of the story of my trying to track down exactly what happened, and she was not given credit, and it was the research was, it was just a total detective story, but then on my end, because it was really not clear, even where she was for like the first 6 months that I was in her. She was completely, I do a lot of journalism where I have to find people, and I think of myself as pretty good at it, but she had really disappeared. And so it was partly, so it's a story of finding about her, but then unearthing this whole history and then bringing it up to today. And there's, in the evidence system for sexual assault, and there's still just so many problems there, and so much promise. The fact that, well, anyway, I could go on and on, but anyway, so that's coming out, and I'm also kind of working to start more of a conversation about the problems that exist now in the sexual assault evidence system and stuff. But anyway, so that was an amazing book to do, and it was the kind of thing where I just pulled the string and fell down the rabbit hole, like you said, and like once I found out about this kind of mysterious story, I just couldn't stop. And but I'm very much hankering to do something that's not super depressing now. So I've actually hit on a different story that's a little more also political, also, but is a little more goofy. And so I'm hoping that, and I've definitely am deep into all the research on that, and I just love it. I know you feel the same way, that the hunt and the foraging, and you know, where you're deep in it and you come across a person who tells you something and you're the first person to know it, you know, or I mean, of course they know it, but you're the first person. They're like, oh, I was wondering when somebody would ask me this, you know, I've been waiting. Or you dig up that old newspaper article or something that nobody's looked at, you know, in 30 years, and it's mind-blowing. And you just find these things and you get so excited to share them, but kind of put them in that foil or setting where people can see it for what it is, because it just like is all sad and limp and just lying there unrecognized. So you've kind of like gotta, you know, put the big hearts and, you know, unicorns and everything around it to make people see like how amazing it is. And just for me, that's just so exciting, and so much, you know, why I'm in love with nonfiction writing especially.
I was thinking that your book that's coming out in January, it seems like it could be like a kind of Silent Spring thing, right? Like it can actually like change an entire field and how people operate based on what
well,
happens.
that is very kind of you. I don't know. We'll see. I mean, it's there's a lot of great people doing great work but I do feel like there's the whole area of sexual assault evidence and forensics is just this thing that nobody looks at. And so just trying to bring attention to it, and like one like op-ed I want to write. I think, you know, sometimes people get their back up about improving the system. Is the rape kit system is very inaccessible. There's like very few, you know, it's, you know, like as you can totally imagine, it's very underfunded. There's just massive places where you can't really get access to even filing evidence, and where there's no hospitals that really do that work, or none of the special nurses and stuff. So that's something I'm really trying to call attention to. But sometimes when you start talking about that, people get their back up and they're so like, you know, shouldn't we, you know, I'm against the carceral system. You're just putting more people in prison and stuff. And the fact is that since there's been a huge kind of uptick in using rape kits since the backlog came to be known, and like there's been 500,000 rape kits processed in the last several years. And since that happened, the false imprisonment the imprisonment of innocent men has plummeted. And in fact, you know, I just found a report from the Exoneration Project saying, you know, since like 2010, when we were really starting to use good evidence, the false accusations have just like, they're not, it's just not the same anymore, at least for sexual assault. It's gone way down, because when you have good evidence, obviously, you're not putting the wrong people in prison, which, so it's sort of just, and again, that's the thing where people, you know, that you were kind of talking about, people kind of come to sometimes the topic with their back up and already like mad before they, you know, and so I'm sort of preparing for that as I go out with my tour of kind of all the the reasons, the things people think they already know about this, and that, you know, just having to work with people to see, like, actually, you know, this is like an awesome thing that could work and be good on all sides, and if we funded it and paid attention to it and talked about it even. So yeah, anyway, I don't.
Yeah.
But yes, it's, you know, you kind of start, I feel like you start with the story and then you kind of end up involved in all the politics of it. But it's that, I don't know about you, but it just feels like you kind of fall down into it without quite knowing where you're going. And then, yeah.
All right. Is it time? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that we should thank you both for all of this wonderful conversation. And please, you can stop by our wonderful friends from Broadside and pick up your own copy of Andrew's wonderful book. And maybe we can have you guys back sometime for further conversations. This was wonderful. Thanks again.